You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 79. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action today. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac. Today's interview and guest are like nothing I've ever recorded before, and this is probably the interview that I am most proud of. Like many of you over the past year, I've been looking more closely at the world we live in, listening more to the stories and experiences of others, and questioning what is it that I can do to not only be a better person, but to make the world we live in a better place for my children and for all of you. If you tuned in a couple weeks ago, you heard my interview with Rachel Lauren, and then you heard us talk about today's guest, Lewis L. Reed. At the time of this interview, Lewis was the Director of Organizing and Partnerships for Dream Corps Justice, and he is now the Senior Director of Memberships and Partnerships for Reform Alliance. I asked Lewis to come on the show for two reasons. The first is because my message to all of you has been and continues to be one in which you are in charge of your future, no matter what your past and your present look like, and Lewis embodies that to the fullest extent. He's going to share with you his story that includes 14 years in federal prison and how today he's helping lead the charge in criminal justice and legal reform, along with how he's creating a legacy of purpose for himself. The other reason I wanted to talk to Lewis is because criminal justice reform is a topic that I'm not well versed in. Yes, I've taken criminal law classes for my degrees, but without having firsthand knowledge of what goes on in a prison or even outside of one, how do we know what changes need to be made? What is it that you and I can do to make our world a better, safer place to live in? One in which everyone has the ability and capability to thrive. Lewis and I have a very candid, open, and honest conversation about all of this and much more, including a personal experience of mine that I've only shared with a very few close friends and my husband. I truly believe that it's in having these types of conversations that we can create change and experience empathy. So I'm eternally grateful to Lewis for having this one with me. Hi, Lewis.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I am so good. I'm so excited to talk to you. Like I told you before, I've been stalking you ever since Rachel Lauren introduced you into my life. So I am beyond giddy to actually get to talk to you one-on-one today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and to my listeners. If you take a moment to introduce yourself, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Look, I've been waiting with bated breath to have this conversation. There's not too many things that can pull me out of watching and giving a running commentary analysis on the Derek Chauvin trial, killing of George Floyd, other than Michelle. So,
I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been seeing you on Clubhouse all morning. And I had a workout and my phone kept lighting up that you were in a new room talking about it.
Yeah. So if it wasn't Michelle, I think there's only one other Michelle in this world that could have pulled me out. And her last name is Obama. So
wow.
I think that you're in good
wow.
So look, my name is Lewis L. Reed. I am the Director of National Organizing and Partnerships for a organization formerly called Cut 50. Currently, we have a new name, a name change called Dream Corps Justice. We are co-founded by CNN political commentator Van Jones and also Jessica Jackson, who happens to be the legal mentor to Kim Kardashian. And I served nearly 14 years in federal prison. And while I was incarcerated, there was one of three things that shone, to use lack of a better term, my inner brilliance or my inner diamond. And those 3 points was, number one, I looked at my life retrospectively. I looked at my life introspectively, and I looked at my life prospectively. And I said to myself, how am I going to be able to not just live up to my God given potential that I had been living under up to that point, but how was I going to maximize life? How was I going to literally leave a signature that was going to far outlast me once I was released from incarceration? And how was I also going to work on healing people? In the process, even if I couldn't go back in time and heal the people that I had harmed, how could I vicariously, through the work that I wanted to do, heal other people? Hence the reason why I landed in the space, in essence, of criminal legal reform. I am also a licensed clinician. I'm non-practicing, but I am a licensed clinician, and I'm also a board certified clinician through the state of Connecticut as well.
And now when you say that, I know your background. I know why you were in prison. And I wonder, I don't think that everyone that's in prison right now takes the time to reflect in the way that you did. But I also think that the crime that you committed, it wasn't purposeful to an extent.
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah. So, so let me just kind of like take our listening audience just back for a second. In 1999, I participated in a drive-by shooting in part for a robbery, in retaliation, I should say, to a robbery where some individuals from my neighborhood essentially stuck me up. Rather than, taking the legal course of action, notifying police, etc., what I did was I took matters into my own hand, participated in a drive-by shooting, ended up shooting one individual that was responsible for the robbery. However, I inadvertently shot a then 5-year-old child in the shoulder. And consequently, and rightfully so, I was sentenced to a term of imprisonment of approximately 16 years. They gave me 188 months in federal prison, to which I served nearly 14 years on that 188-month sentence or that 16-year sentence in incarceration. And the reason why I nearly served that length of time is not necessarily because my behavior while I was incarcerated was that egregious or it was that non-compliant. It just so happened that at the time, when you got sentenced to a federal term of imprisonment, you served approximately 87% of your sentence.
And is that the same today, or has that changed?
That has changed, and I think that you're going to know a little bit ahead of me in my introduction into the First Step Act. But I did have the privilege of working on a federal legislation, or I should say, advocating for a federal legislation, the only federal legislation regarding criminal justice reform that the Trump administration signed into law. And the name of that legislation was called the First Step Act. And what the First Step Act has done as a result of being passed into law is, number one, it has released more than 16,000 people from federal custody. And when you quantify those numbers, that's more than 500,000 years of human freedom restored back into our community. That's number one. The second thing is through the crack cocaine provision of that bill, it has released 94% of people who were incarcerated who, oh, by the way, happened to be African American. It released those individuals from federal custody. Number three, it has also restored a sense of dignity for women who are incarcerated. So, the listening audience may ask, how can a person who is incarcerated have dignity restored back unto them? I'm glad that you asked that question because I'm going to answer it. Women who were incarcerated on the federal level prior to the passage of the First Step Act, if they were pregnant and in labor, they were shackled. So as a result of the First Step Act being passed, mothers will no longer be shackled while they are in birth and postpartum. Another thing is that they will no longer be strip searched by the opposite sex while they are incarcerated. And number three, they will have access to free feminine hygiene products. Prior to the passage of this legislation, women who were incarcerated, if they were indigent, they had access to very limited feminine hygiene products. And forgive me if I'm tripping over my words, because I am talking to you on my male ignorance on this particular portion of the bill. But as a result of such, women will no longer have to have money on their commissary books. They will no longer have to have their monthly flow subsidized, or I should say, feminine hygiene products, because of their monthly flow subsidized by their family. They will be able to have access to that free of charge.
And I think for a lot of people, nobody knows this. Nobody understands that this is truly what's going on. A woman who's shackled giving birth. I mean, I've had 2 C-sections, and it almost felt like I was shackled because, you have to be strapped down. But I can't imagine natural childbirth and being handcuffed and all of that, not having access to the hygiene products that you need. When you touched on crack cocaine, and it's really the difference of the rock versus the powder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they carry different charges just because of the form that they're in, but it's the same drug.
Well, on the surface, it's a matter of the difference between rock versus powder. But I think that when we, peel the covers back on the bed, what we are dealing with is systemic racism.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is that you have a crack that is going to be so more prevalent in the Bridgeports of Connecticut, in the South Sides of Chicago, and the Comptons of California, where you have a predominantly Black and brown and or poor white a demographic, whereas cocaine is going to be sold in the Greenwich of Connecticut, or in the Malibus of California, or in the in some other place where you have wealthy white folks. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you would you don't need a degree in science to be able to figure out that is simply a matter of race, and it's a matter of systemic racism. And so you actually hit it, the nail right on the head.
Yeah. So the second and third points that you've brought up, I completely agree with. But I want to talk about the first one of how we've released these federal prisoners and how we reform them, because I think some can't be reformed. Some we have a huge mental health crisis and issue that's going on in our country that nobody's paying. Maybe there are people paying attention to it, but not enough. And these are the people who I've never shared this, but I was assaulted by my very first client when I went freelancing. Mm. And she had me in a chokehold driving me in a car. And it was at a stoplight surrounded by people that someone finally called 911. And I was still in the chokehold when the officer came. And when she released me, the officer asked me, "What do you want me to do with her? Do you want to press charges?" And I said, "I want her to go to a mental hospital now. Oh. She needs to go somewhere that will help her mentally." And instead, because she had a child in the car, they put her in jail for 3 days, and they charged her with child endangerment. They said that I was not a victim because I didn't want to press charges, but I was advocating for her mental health, which was ignored. Oh. So we see that this is the huge problem, because as you and I talked before we hit record, the crimes that are being committed are not crimes that a person normally would do. They just wouldn't, outside of crimes of passion and in the moment and, something that happened. So what do we do about that? How are you reforming the system or trying to reform the system to make it so that these people like yourself who have you've reflected for 14 years on what more can I do? How can I make things better on the legacy I leave and on the environment that I'm living in to make it better, versus the ones who they won't. They get out, like we see with the guy in New York who stabbed his mother and now just beat an Asian woman. Mm-hmm. Should he have ever gotten out? He has some issues, obviously, but then that goes back to the mental health crisis.
Yeah, I think for me, when you deal with the individual that you're talking about, case in point, who unfortunately killed his mother, and perpetuated an assault on this elderly woman, let alone, her just being Asian, right? Just her being a woman, mm-hmm. And being elderly alone. That's just absolutely heartbreaking. And let me just pause for a brief commercial break just to acknowledge the trauma that you went through as well. No one person should have to live through that. No one person, no person in general should have to, experience that level of trauma. And so for me, it's not about what do we do with the people who are incarcerated and who are going out. My larger question is, what do we do with people who are exhibiting signs and behaviors and mental health breakdowns and exhibiting, just instability before they went in, right? Like, at some point in time,
how do we prevent it?
Yeah. And so I believe it was Einstein who said, like, an ounce of cure is better than an ounce of cure is better than an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. What are we doing with the ounce of prevention that we should be intervening in when we see people exhibiting behaviors, when we see people exhibiting things that, it's going to ultimately land in a space of criminality. And I think that what has happened in our society is as follows. We have a tendency to criminalize mental health. We have a tendency to criminalize substance abuse. We have a tendency to criminalize issues that are more social, that require more social services than they require the criminal legal system. And so for us, it's convenient to lock people up. Right? Like, look, you were grounded in empathy. You had a woman who literally had you in a chokehold for X amount of time. It probably felt like an eternity for you. You had your airway occluded. You didn't know, what she was liable, or prone to do to you, et cetera. Right? Let's think about how even through all of that, you were grounded in empathy. The police show up, lights and sirens. They have their guns. They have their mace. They probably have their taser. Michelle has to make the decision. What do you want to do? And you are so grounded in empathy. You are like, look, I don't want this woman to be criminalized. She needs help. She needs appropriate help. And as a result of the help that you're trying to get her, she doesn't necessarily get that, or that I should say that you suggested that she doesn't get the appropriate help. Like, there is a major disconnect in our criminal legal system and our social service system. There's a dissonance here. And I think that what we have to do through legislation, through goodwill, through advocacy, through organizing, and through all of the tools that we have at our disposal, we have to bridge that gap. One of the things I always say, Michelle, those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources and power. Let me say that one more time. In the event, if your listening audience happen to be buffering or they happen to be distracted, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources and power. And so I saw you in that description standing in the gap to bridge those individuals who have been affected by the problem, who know the solution, but were distance from resources and power.
Absolutely. So how do we fix that? How do we deal with that? Well, at the same time, here in California, we have all kinds of laws that are now bills that are being proposed. One specific one recently is we have a senator who wants to make it so that if someone comes into your home to burglarize it and your home, you should just do what they say and give them what they want. Because if we all just do what the criminals want, then nobody gets harmed. And she's also proposing, I find this comical. I truly do, because just this last week, we actually had 4 men come down our street, check all of the cars, ransacked a car, went into someone's garage, and they're now being seen within a few mile radius of doing it over and over again. I don't understand why we should just give up what we've worked for and what we own, because, that way then no one gets harmed. How do we get through all of this? Because there's so many layers. It's like the onion that just never ends. It's just so much.
Yeah. Well, so this is, based off of my years of criminal enterprising. One of the things that I know is that we are applying a criminal solution to a social issue. when people ransack vehicles, which, in my more mature age in life, right, there's no excuse for. But, when you have people who commit theft, when you have people who are, just, committing crimes that seem to be, of property crimes and things of that nature, a lot of times, dare I say, and I don't know the statistical a number for this, but I would bet a dime to a dollar that it's a high percentage of people who are being driven by substance abuse. People who commit petty crimes are being driven by substance abuse. So again, we need to treat the front end of the issue. How do we treat the front end of the issue? Well, look, there is a major conversation that is happening in all four corners of our country that was born out of what happened last year in Minnesota on Memorial Day, through the unfortunate lynching of George Floyd at the knee, not at the hands, but at the knee of Derek Chauvin. So our criminal justice system is on trial, and that is the unnamed co-defendant along with Derek Chauvin. What we need to be doing is we need to be not defunding the police, but we need to be refunding the police. And I don't necessarily mean giving more money to them, but what I mean is that we need to be allowing or allocating appropriate resources so that when they do respond to calls, and if there is a notion, if there is a suspicion around an individual, either A, being under the influence of substance abuse, or B, if someone has a mental health disorder, then they can call for an on-call and on-duty social worker who will be able to link those individuals into services. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it negates the criminality or the criminal behavior that they participated in. But I think that we should be triaging the underlying issue first, because I can tell you, Michelle, look, when you are incarcerated, you are not receiving therapy and clinical services at the leisure of a Dr. Phil. I can tell you that.
I was going to add, that was going to be one of my next questions is, what are they doing within the prison system to help?
So look, this is what's happening. People are incarcerated in general. People are incarcerated. They are working out. They are playing cards. They are watching TV. And they are participating in other extracurricular activity. As it relates to the underlying issues that got them there in the first place, what is happening is that you have these prescribers that are literally, giving drugs out on a conveyor belt. You have people who just stand in the medical line. They will receive their Valium. They'll receive, any other medication that is appropriate to their diagnosis. But there is no therapy. There is no therapy. Now, some may argue, well, that's drug therapy. Okay, drug therapy very well may be good. But however, how do you have drug therapy without talk therapy, without psychotherapy? The two have to be congruent with one another. They have to run in tandem with one another. So I'm telling you this from firsthand experience. You can walk into any county jail anywhere in the United States of America, any prison in the United States of America, and you are not going to see, forensic psychologists. You're not going to see forensic psychiatrists. You are not going to see LCSWs and any other, clinicians in multitudes giving people the appropriate care that they need. So I think that what we need to do is we need to make sure that our police officers, our first responders, that they have the appropriate human resources in order to be able to, plug these people into appropriate services when necessary.
And I think we need to expand on the services that we offer too, because mental health care is as available as it is, it's really not that available to those who truly need it, as we see. It's just, unless you have, good insurance and, the best place is going to be in Malibu where it's like a vacation, it looks like. But that's not what we have. A big homeless population here in San Jose, and the majority of them, it is proven, they have mental health issues. They have addiction issues. It's not that someone lost their job and they're now on the streets. It's somebody who has been doing this for years. This is their way of life, and building them a tiny home is not going to help them because they need more than just the roof over their head to get them out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we even begin? It's just so big. What is Dream Corps doing to help this? And how do we help those individuals who are not like you in the system, who have their own come to Jesus with themselves, because they're not doing that, as we're seeing?
Yeah, well, look, so from a Dream Corps perspective, one of the things that we're focused on is legislation. We want to be able to create springboards to opportunity rather than perpetuating trapdoors to failure. Right, legislation like the First Step Act, where we are placing a premium on education while people who are incarcerated as well. Right, making sure that these individuals have access to mentors, making sure that they have access to educational services, in addition to the other pathways to rehabilitation that they actually need while they are incarcerated. On the post-incarceration side, that's after people are released from incarceration, we are trying to ensure that they are connected not just to employment, not just the housing, but that they're also connected to the appropriate services within their community. How do we do that? We do that through the Empathy Network. We have organizers and advocates literally in all 50 states, who have their own grassroots organizations. And most times when people get in contact with us and they say, hey, Cut 50 or Dream Corps Justice, we had the good fortune of being released under your bill that you got passed in this particular state. Do you have any post-incarceration resources for me that I might be able to take advantage of? And we, for instance, would be able to plug that individual with Michelle in Malibu, or, with Derek, who happens to be in Lincoln, Nebraska, or something to that degree. So but you have to consider, right, that we're only a speck of sand on a large seashore regarding this issue. I often tell people that the criminal legal system is like a 3-year-old trying to wrap her arms around a full adult elephant. It's too big. It's too massive. It's too expansive. However, if all of us take just a little bit of ourselves and we place it on as much as we can on this elephant, we will eventually be able to cover the entire thing.
So it brings me to two questions, because one, I thought of in regards to, this is great for us to be able to help people with mental health issues and substance abuse issues. But then we do also have the criminals who are literally just like lifelong criminals, I guess you would call them. They perpetually are doing something to land back in jail. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with, gang members who are killing each other, that it has nothing to do really with the police, involvement, but these people are against each other. How do we combat that?
Yeah. So for me, what I think is that, I look at it that these are people involved in a systematic oppression regarding poverty. When I was younger, I was a participant in gang activity. I didn't prey on other people just because I was raised by my grandmama. But even that, in saying that I was raised by my grandmama, we have to consider that my parents were incarcerated when I was approximately 5 years old. So I had no other choice but to be raised by my grandmother. And in my grandmother raising me, she did the best that she could do. However, I didn't come from a 2-parent household. My household was destabilized as a result of both of my parents being incarcerated. So guess what? If you place a plant in the darkest corner of a room and you do not expose that plant to sunlight, if you do not expose that plant to water, you do not expose that plant to plant food and all the other nutrients that it needs, when you check on that plant in about 3 days' time, that plant is probably not going to grow, but it's going to wither away and eventually die. And so that is what we see happening with human potential. When we speak of gang violence, when we speak of serious risk group affiliation, when we speak of people who perpetuate crimes, particularly in neighborhoods that don't illuminate that sunshine, that don't illuminate these opportunities for growth, that don't, make it conducive for these people to be able to thrive, then ultimately what's going to happen was the aforementioned. So for me, this is Holy Week, and this is just the little Christian preacher boy inside of me speaking. I believe that no one is beyond redemption. I believe that no one is beneath grace. I believe that no one should be reduced down to a moment in time where they have made the poorest decision of their lives. Look, at the top of our discussion, I talked about me having participated in a drive-by shooting, in part that left a then 5-year-old child seriously injured in the shoulder. And if I did not allow this PS to come, the listening audience would think, oh, wow, well, I wonder how that child has fared all of these years. And I'm glad that they asked that question.
I was about to ask it, actually.
Well, I'm glad I asked it for you. So even in that situation, right, if I had left the story there, you might say, well, yeah, this guy, he may be able to articulate his points very well, but this is still an outstanding issue. But for me, I wasn't comfortable with what happened in that particular situation. So what I ended up doing last year during the pandemic, because I knew the family involved in that case, in that situation, I knew his parents, we had mutual acquaintances, so on and so forth. He and we end up sitting down and we talked, and it was literally grace in operation. I have never been in a company of someone who was so forgiving, who was so loving, who just extended so much mercy to me, as a result of me having done something to that individual where I very well may not necessarily have warranted it. So with that having been said, ultimately, the point that I'm trying to land at is this. You have people who do stupid things. You have people in a moment's, you have people who make permanent decisions in a temporary situation. Does that mean that these individuals are rehabilitatable or are unrehabilitatable? Does that mean that these people are unredeemable? Well, that's a debatable issue. What I am going to say is this. So long as you have a Louis L. Reed who has breath in his body, so long as you have people like Topeka K. Sam, so long as you have people such as Clover Perez, so long as you have people such as Rachel Lawrence, so long as you have all of these other people who comprise what we call the empathy network, people who believe in empathy and action, we will not allow these people, even if they do find themselves indefinitely in a prison sentence, we will not allow them to just waste away and have their life diminished through a prison sentence, allowing them to, waste away in a prison cell, playing cards, working out, so on and so forth. We need to get these individuals the appropriate help that they need, whether that be through education, whether that be through some type of institutional reform, whether it be through correctional reform, etc. But we need to make sure that we get them the appropriate help that they need.
I love that you shared that you met with this guy and how beautiful it was, because
we're still in contact every day. We text one another several times throughout the course of the day. So it's not necessarily, it wasn't a one and done. Our relationship is sincere, is genuine, and it's something, look, my grandmom used to say, everybody related ain't family, and everybody who's family you don't have to be related to.
Amen.
And we consider ourselves family.
Because, not everybody would be able to do that. And that speaks volumes to the person that you are, the human being that you are. And, this was a big reason why I did want to talk to you, because, I've talked to my husband, I've talked to friends about having you on, because this is a different type of interview than I've ever done before. And to know that your victim was, a 5-year-old, one of them, I have a 5-year-old, I have a now 5 and 6-year-old, and to think of, well, how would that make me feel towards you? And the whole reason that I wanted to talk to you is because I'm seeing what you're doing. I see the difference that you are making in the world. I see the type of change that you are trying to help those who are in prison. And then I also see the education that you're bringing to those of us who have never been to prison, who don't have that experience, who are completely, I don't want to say I'm clueless, but I am not educated enough in this subject to know what is it that we need to do. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, because I think that you are beyond a decent human being. I think you're a very good person, and you have a lot to offer those of us who need to know more about this, because in order for us to make a difference as a world, we need to start individually to know what needs to be done and to hear from yourself and others like you.
Well, look, I appreciate not just being able to have this conversation, but I also appreciate being able to lift this conversation up with other people who very well may not necessarily have been exposed to this particular life. Many of us, we have the luxury of sitting perched from a place of privilege. Look, again, just let me close with a benediction if I can.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the Good Samaritan, we often like to think about if there was a child dangling from the fifth story of a burning building, that we would catch that child before he or she hit the ground. Or if there was a old woman in New York City that was being assaulted by a younger person, or just being assaulted in general, that we will rise to the occasion. Notice that I said rise to the occasion. That's being a Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
However, but when you look at the story of the Good Samaritan didn't rise to the occasion. The Good Samaritan literally got off of his horse, i.e., he got off of his place of privilege. He got off of his place of entitlement to get down to where the individual who was hurting was. He never asked, why were you on this Jericho road? He never said to himself, well, this person probably brought it on himself to be assaulted. He never questioned, well, why should I respond to the call of this individual if the priest walked over him, and if the other individual who I thought that was supposed to be responsive to his need walked, turned the other in the other direction? He just did what he had to do. And so for me, I think that if we are going to rise to the occasion, so to speak, we have to first kneel down to where people are. And I think that this conversation is kneeling us closer to where people are in their brokenness and in their hurt.
So what is it that people can do? When I had Rachel on a few weeks ago, and the biggest thing that I took from her is that we all need to listen more. And I completely agree. And I think that this past year we've been listening more, and we have a lot more listening to do. What can we, as someone like myself, do to help make a difference?
Well, I think there's one of several things. First and foremost, you can text the word empathy to 97483 to support the work that Dream Court Justice is doing. Again, that word is empathy to 97483. We need empathy in action. That's number one. The second thing that we can do is have conversations. Conversations are passports into each other's lives. Look, you just said that before we even had this conversation today, you had conversations with other people. You had a pillow talk with your husband. You had, tea with your girlfriends. You consulted with other people, right? That's what we need to do. We need to have conversations with one another. And the third thing, when we see an individual who is hurting, when we see someone who very well may need help, we should be, obviously safety first, right? But we should be responsive. We should be responsive from a space of our heart. We should say to ourselves, how can I help this individual as best as I can, that is within the full scope of my authority, the full scope of my power, the full scope of my love, the full scope of my attention, the full scope of my safety, and also the full scope of my personhood. And I think that if we do that, when we do that, ultimately we are going to be better than what we were before.
I certainly hope so. And I appreciate you more than you know. I've told you this before. I'll keep saying it. Thank you so much for coming on, for being so open and honest and candid. I truly appreciate it, Louis.
Look, again, Michelle, you are the absolute queen. I appreciate you. I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate you lifting this conversation up, or I should say, probably kneeling this conversation down to your
I
listeners.
like that. Would you please also share where everyone can find you and follow you so they can kneel down some more with you?
Yeah, thanks so much. So you can just follow me on any social media platform at Lewis L. Reed. I'm on Twitter at Lewis L. Reed. I am on Instagram. You can just type in Lewis L. Reed in the search engine on Instagram. You'll be able to find me. I was incarcerated when MySpace was out, so you will not find me on MySpace. And if you are still using MySpace, you need to come into the 21st century and get out of yesteryears.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
After we recorded this, I cried. I cried tears of joy and appreciation that this was exactly the type of discussion we would have, and that we could both be so open and honest with each other and with all of you. Of course, this also brought up a part of my past that I didn't know I would share with all of you. But I'm glad I did, because it shows you exactly what changes need to be made in our legal system. We have so much work to do as a nation and simply as human beings. No one person can do this on their own, but together, I know we can make a difference. We just have to be willing to do the work, to listen, to kneel, and to rise up together. My hope for you listening is that we were able to shed some light on the truth and share knowledge, because I know I am walking away with a fuller heart, knowing that I better understand what criminal justice reform means, is about, and how we need to pave the road ahead of us in order to see a positive change. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and beyond appreciative of Lewis for sharing not only his experience, but opening my eyes to the bigger picture. As always, please remember that no matter your past or your present, you, my friend, are in charge of your future and have the ability to make it whatever you want.